I still remember the night the truth finally came out. The sound of the rain tapping on the kitchen window, the faint smell of his aftershave mixing with the bitterness of my overboiled tea. After 40 years of marriage, I thought I knew every breath that man took, every pause between his words. But that night, something in his eyes, something hollow, fragile, told me the life I thought I had built was never mine at all. He sat across from me at the oak table he built with his own hands when we were young and still believed in forever. His fingers trembled as he traced the cracks in the wood, not meeting my gaze. "Eleanor," he said softly, like my name was a confession itself. "There's something I need to tell you before it's too late." At first I thought it was about his health. His coughing had worsened, and his doctor had warned him about the strain on his heart. But the way his voice broke, it wasn't the voice of a man afraid of dying. It was the voice of someone terrified of being seen for the first time. "What is it, George?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my heart had already begun its descent into that cold, hollow space where all my fears live. "You're scaring me." He finally looked up. His eyes, the same grey-blue eyes that had watched me give birth, that had stared at me with pride when we paid off our first home, were now filled with something darker. Guilt. Deep, ancient guilt. "I wasn't honest with you," he whispered, "about who I was, before you." I laughed nervously. "Before me? George, we were 23 when we met. What could you possibly be hiding after all these years?" He didn't laugh, didn't even blink. "I was married before you," he said, just like that. No build-up, no mercy. "You weren't my first wife." The clock ticked twice, then silence. My whole body froze. Not like in those dramatic movies where people scream and faint, but in that quiet, paralyzing way grief sneaks in. My mind started flipping through 4 decades of memories, searching for cracks. The missing years, the strange letters, the rare moments he'd stare into the distance like he was listening to someone else's voice in his head. "Married?" I repeated. My own voice sounded foreign. "George, what are you saying? You had a wife before me." He nodded slowly, eyes brimming. "Her name was Lillian." The name hit me like a gust of wind through an open grave. Lillian. It sounded delicate, almost poetic, like the kind of woman who wrote love letters in ink and smelled of gardenias. For a split second, I hated her. This ghost of a woman who had lived a life with my husband long before I even existed in his world. "When?" I asked quietly. "When did this happen?" He looked down, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. "I was 19. We married young, too young. It didn't last long, or so I thought." "Or so you thought?" I whispered, each word cutting through the air. "George, you're not making sense." He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "She disappeared, Eleanor. One day she was gone. No note, no goodbye. I searched for her for months. The police said maybe she'd run off, or worse. I thought she was dead." The floor beneath me felt like it was breathing. "And you never told me?" He shook his head, tears forming. "I wanted to. God knows I did. But when we met, you were light, warmth, a reason to live again. I told myself the past was buried, that she was gone. But last week..." He paused, reaching into his jacket pocket with trembling hands. He pulled out a faded envelope. This came in the mail. The paper looked old, yellowed at the edges, but the handwriting, it was graceful, deliberate. On the front, one word: George. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What's inside?" He swallowed hard. "It's from her, from Lillian." I felt my breath catch. "That's impossible. She'd be dead by now, wouldn't she?" "She's alive," he said, "and she wants to meet me." The room tilted. I clutched the edge of the table, searching his face as some sign that this was a cruel joke, some twisted test of devotion. But George had never been cruel. That was the worst part. He'd been kind, patient, the man who brushed my hair when I was sick, who danced with me barefoot in the living room when no one was watching. The man I trusted more than anyone on earth. And now he was telling me that I had been second all along. I looked at the letter, then at him. "You're going to meet her, aren't you?" He hesitated. "I already did." The teacup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound seemed to echo forever. You saw her?" I managed to say, voice trembling. "You looked her in the eyes after 40 years of marriage, our marriage, and you didn't tell me?" He nodded, guilt flooding his face. "She's sick, Eleanor, dying. She reached out because she wanted to make peace. I didn't go there to betray you. I went because I needed to close that part of my life before I leave this world." Before I leave this world. I realized then that George wasn't just confessing about his past. He was confessing because he knew he was dying, that his time was short, and that somewhere, buried under the guilt and secrets, was a man desperate to die clean. But all I could feel was the ache, the betrayal, the unbearable question whispering inside me. Had I been living another woman's borrowed life? For 3 days after that confession, I barely slept. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the echo of one name, Lillian. Every corner I turned, every drawer I opened, every picture I touched seemed to whisper it. Lillian had become a shadow in my home, a stranger between my husband and me, and I didn't even know what she looked like. George tried to speak to me then, next morning. He followed me from room to room, his voice breaking, his hand reaching, but I couldn't bear to look at him. 40 years of memories had curdled overnight. The man who had kissed my forehead after every storm, who had promised that no secret would ever come between us, had carried one deeper than I could fathom. On the third morning, as I was packing a small bag to stay with my sister, I found something I shouldn't have. It was in the drawer of his study desk, tucked beneath old receipts and broken pens. A photograph. It was faded, grainy, the colours washed out by time. A young woman stood by a riverbank, her dark hair tied back with a silk ribbon, her eyes full of life. She wore a white summer dress and held a wildflower in her hand. And beside her, smiling that same shy, gentle smile I once fell in love with, was George. I felt my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. On the back of the photo, written in delicate handwriting, "Lillian and George, 1961. That was 4 years before I met him. I sank into the chair and pressed the photograph to my chest, feeling my heart pound beneath it. This woman, this ghost, had existed before me. She had been his first forever, and I was the second chapter he never meant to write. When George entered the room, his face went pale. "Eleanor, please, I didn't mean for you to find that." "Find it?" My voice was trembling. "You kept her picture in your drawer all these years, and you say you didn't mean for me to find it." He stepped forward, guilt dripping from his every word. It wasn't about love anymore. It was guilt. I kept it because I never had closure. She just vanished, Eleanor. One day, her clothes were gone, her ring left on the nightstand, and the police said maybe she'd drowned or run away. I thought she was gone forever. I buried her in my memory. "Until last week," I said coldly. "Until she decided to rise from the dead." He lowered his head. "She wrote that she was sorry, that she'd been forced to disappear, that she'd been hiding under another name." "Hiding?" I asked, incredulous. "From what?" He hesitated, his lips trembling. "From me." Those words sank like stones into the air between us. "What do you mean, from you?" I whispered. He looked at me with eyes so heavy with regret, I could feel the decades pressing down on him. Lillian, she said I wasn't the man she thought I was, that I was part of something I didn't understand back then. Her father, he was a banker, a powerful one. There were debts, secrets. She thought marrying me would free her, but it trapped her instead. She ran to save herself. I stared at him in disbelief. And now, after 40 years, she just reappears? To make peace? He nodded. She's dying. She said she wants to meet one last time, to tell me the truth about what really happened. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. You said you already met her. He nodded slowly. At a hospice, 2 towns away. Did you tell her you're married? I asked sharply. Yes, he said. She knows about you. I laughed bitterly. Oh, how generous of her. Does she approve? Eleanor, he said softly. She said something I can't ignore. Something I need to tell you too. But not now. Please, give me a few days. That terrified me more than anything else he'd said. For the next week, George grew quieter, more withdrawn. He stopped shaving. He stopped eating. He would sit for hours in the living room, staring at that same photo, lost in another lifetime. I wanted to hate him, but every time I looked at him, frail, coughing, his once strong hands trembling, I saw the man who had held me through miscarriages, who built our home with his sweat, who wrote me birthday notes in shaky cursive even in his 70s. I wanted to hate him, but love doesn't vanish that easily. Still, the silence was unbearable. So one afternoon, while he slept, I took his car keys. I drove 2 towns over to find her. The hospice stood at the edge of a quiet street lined with dying trees. The nurse at the reception looked at me kindly when I said I was here to visit Lillian Hughes. She told me Lillian was resting, and I could wait if I wished. I sat in the corridor, staring at the sterile white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic and wilted flowers. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it echo. When the door finally opened and I saw her, I almost couldn't breathe. She was thin, frail, her hair silver like mine, her face lined with time. But her eyes, they were alive, sharp, searching. She looked up from her bed, and when our gazes met, I knew instantly who she was. You must be Eleanor, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. You look just like I imagined. I froze. How do you know my name? She smiled faintly. George told me, and I know because I used to be you. My throat tightened. Used to be me? Yes, she said, turning her face toward the window where the sun bled through the blinds. I know what it's like to love him, to trust him, to build a world around his promises, and to lose yourself in it. Her words were calm, but her eyes carried storms. What happened to you, Lillian? I whispered. Why did you disappear? She smiled sadly. Because I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Something that made me realize the man I married wasn't just keeping a secret about me, but about himself. A shiver went down my spine. What do you mean? Before she could answer, the nurse came in, reminding us of her medicine time. Lillian nodded weakly, then looked back at me. Come back tomorrow, Eleanor, she said softly. There's something you need to know. Something he never told you. I walked out trembling, my heart pounding in my ears. By the time I reached the car, I realized my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. If what she said was true, then George wasn't just a man with a hidden past. He was a man with a secret that could destroy everything. and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. That night, I didn't sleep. The air in our bedroom felt too heavy to breathe. George lay beside me, his back turned, his breaths uneven. I watched his silhouette against the dim light slipping through the curtains and wondered who this man beside me really was. The next morning, I didn't wait for him to wake. I dressed quietly, slipped my coat on, and drove back to the hospice. My hands trembled the entire way. I needed answers. When I reached her room, Lillian was awake, sitting by the window, her thin fingers tracing invisible lines in the air. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said. "I couldn't stay away," I replied. "You said there was something I needed to know. Tell me." Lillian's eyes softened, but her voice was sharp. "Eleanor, you've lived with him for 40 years. You must have noticed it. The locked drawer in his study, the hidden envelope in the attic, the way he never spoke about his family." I froze. "How do you know about that drawer?" She gave a small, knowing smile. "Because I built it. That desk was a wedding gift to him from my father. There's a hidden compartment beneath the bottom drawer. Did you ever find it?" My heart dropped. I had cleaned that desk for years, polished it, dusted it, never suspecting it held anything more than old paperwork. "What's inside?" I asked. "A name," she said. "The name he was born with." I blinked. "His name? His name is George Whitlock." Lillian shook her head slowly. "No, Eleanor. His real name is Edward Rains." For a moment, I thought she was confused. Perhaps the illness had clouded her mind. But the look in her eyes was sharp, lucid, unforgiving. She continued. "Edward Rains was a bookkeeper at my father's bank in 1959. He was smart, too smart. He uncovered something irregular. My father's company was laundering money through false accounts. Edward confronted him, and instead of going to the police, my father offered him a deal. Marry me, inherit security, and keep silent." I felt my skin crawl. "But Edward didn't want me," she said bitterly. "He wanted power. The marriage was a facade, a bargain. And when I found out, I tried to leave. That night I confronted him, told him I was going to the authorities. The next morning he told everyone I'd run away." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "You're saying he lied? That he was involved in something criminal?" Her eyes met mine. "I'm saying your husband isn't the man you think he is. After I vanished, he changed his name, moved towns and started over. I thought he'd left it all behind, but he didn't. He built a new life on a lie." My hands were cold, my heart pounding against my ribs. "But why tell me now?" I asked. "After all these years?" Lillian sighed. "Because I'm dying, and truth should not die with me. You deserve to know who you've loved all this time." I stood there, silent. 1,000 images flashed through my mind. Our wedding day, his nervous smile, the vows he whispered. Could all of it have been an illusion? Then she said something that stopped my breath completely. "There's a box, Eleanor," she whispered. "In the old study, beneath that false bottom. It has his old identity papers, photographs, and one letter he never sent, addressed to me." I clutched my bag, my heart racing. "What does the letter say?" She looked away. "I never read it, but if you love him still, you'll want to know." I didn't know how I drove home that afternoon. The road blurred. My hands felt numb. When I arrived, George was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames like he could see the ghosts of his own past. "You went to see her," he said without turning. I froze. "How do you know?" He gave a sad smile. "Because you have the same look she had when she discovered who I was." "Who are you, George?" I demanded, Or should I call you Edward?" He flinched, his whole body trembling. "So she told you?" "Yes," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "She told me everything. About the money, the lies, the fake marriage, that you built your life on deceit." He finally turned, his eyes hollow. "It's true, but not the way she told it." "Then tell me your way," I said coldly. He leaned forward, his voice cracking. "I was young, poor, hungry. I took a job at her father's bank. I found the fraud, millions missing, names forged. When I confronted him, he offered me silence for safety. But I refused. The next morning, the police came, not for him, but for me. He framed me, Eleanor. He said I was the thief. The only way out was to disappear." I shook my head. "And marrying his daughter was your solution?" "She loved me," he whispered, "and I thought I loved her too. But when she found out her father's truth, everything crumbled. She said she'd expose him. I begged her not to, for both our sakes. That night she left. I thought she was gone forever." "And so you ran," I said bitterly. "You changed your name, your story, your life." He nodded. "I became George Whitlock, started over. I met you. For the first time, I wasn't pretending. You gave me peace I never thought I'd have." My tears fell silently. "And yet you let me build a life on lies." "I didn't want to lose you," he whispered. "I told myself it didn't matter who I used to be. But when Lillian's letter came, everything I buried rose again." He coughed, clutching his chest, and I realized how fragile he'd become. The man before me wasn't a monster. He was a ruin of who he'd been. I wanted to scream, to run, to burn the photograph. But a part of me, the part that still loved him, stayed frozen. He looked at me then, tears pooling in his eyes. "There's one thing Lillian doesn't know. Something I never told anyone, not even the police." "What?" I whispered. He took a shaky breath. "The night she disappeared, she wasn't alone when she left." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" He stared into the fire, his voice barely audible. "She had a child." For a moment, the world went silent. I felt my knees weaken, my hands trembling. "A child?" He nodded slowly. "Mine. She was pregnant when she vanished." The room spun. 40 years of marriage, and he had a secret family buried in the shadows. I sank into the chair, my breath short. "Does she know where that child is?" He looked at me with haunted eyes. "That's why she wrote to me, Eleanor. She wants me to find him." I didn't speak for hours after that revelation. My mind had become a fog of disbelief and anger, wrapped around one echoing thought. He had a child. All these years I'd cooked for him, nursed him through sickness, listened to his dreams, and somewhere out there, another life existed that carried his blood. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, but it didn't sound like me anymore. "A child? You're telling me you had a son with her, and you kept it from me for 40 years?" George didn't lift his head. His hands were clasped tightly, his knuckles pale as paper. "I didn't know, Eleanor. She never told me. When she left, I thought she was gone forever. Only in that letter she sent now, she wrote that she was pregnant when she ran." The words sliced through me. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the man I had spent most of my life beside wasn't capable of such cruelty. But then I remembered the hidden name, the hidden past, the hidden everything. How could I believe anything now? "Why would she wait until now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What does she want after all these years?" He looked up at me finally, his face pale and drawn. "She said she never told the boy who I was. He grew up thinking his father was a stranger who died before he was born. But now she's dying, and she wants him to know the truth. She wants me to tell him." I stared at him, feeling a bitter laugh crawl up my throat. "So what happens next? You meet him? Tell him how you lived a double life while his mother hid from the man she married?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just need to make it right before I die." There was that word again, die. Every time he said it, it sounded heavier, closer. That night, after he fell asleep in the armchair, I went to the study. The drawer creaked as I pulled it open. I reached beneath it, feeling for the loose panel Lillian had mentioned. My fingers brushed against something hard. I tugged, and a small wooden box came free. It was old. The latch rusted, but it opened with a snap. Inside were folded papers, some photographs, and a letter sealed in wax. The top paper was a birth certificate, dated 1962. The name written there stopped my breath. Nathaniel Rains. Under father, the name read Edward Rains. Under mother, Lillian Hughes. It was real. Every word Lillian had said was true. I sat there for a long time, staring at the name. Nathaniel, a life born out of betrayal, lost to history, while I lived in the echo of a lie. My hands trembled as I picked up the sealed letter. The wax was brittle, easy to break. I hesitated, then unfolded it. The handwriting was George's, or rather, Edward's. "My dearest Lillian, if you ever read this, I'll be gone by then. I never meant for it to end this way. I didn't know how to be the man you needed me to be, or how to wash the blood from what your father did to both of us. I didn't steal from him, but he made sure the world believed I did. I ran to survive, not to forget you. But you must understand, if they find me, they'll destroy us both. If you truly left, take the child and never look back. If he lives, keep my name from him. He deserves a clean start, even if it means erasing me. Forgive me. Edward." The edges of the letter shook in my hands. Blood. They'll destroy us both. What did that mean? It wasn't just guilt or shame, it was fear. Real, living fear. I folded the paper and looked toward the window. The rain had begun again, thin and cold. When George woke the next morning, I handed him the letter. He didn't say a word. He just read it silently, his eyes filling with tears. "I tried to protect her," he whispered, "but I didn't know she was pregnant. I thought she was gone because she hated me." I crossed my arms. "And now you want to find him?" He nodded weakly. "I have to. Before I die, Eleanor, I need to know what became of him. I need to tell him the truth." Something in me broke that morning. Not anger, not pity, just exhaustion. I'd spent my whole life cleaning up the fragments of other people's choices. First, my mother's temper, then my husband's lies. But this time, I wasn't going to sit quietly. So I said, "Then we'll find him. Together." The words surprised even me. He looked up in disbelief. "You'd help me?" I nodded. "Not for you, for me. I deserve to know what kind of life I've really been living." It took 3 days and countless phone calls, but we found a lead. The hospice nurse gave me the name of the social worker who handled Lillian's paperwork. The woman on the phone said Nathaniel had moved to a small town 2 hours north. He was a teacher, married, 2 children, a normal life, a clean life. The drive there was quiet. George's breathing was shallow, his skin pale. He looked like a ghost of himself, clutching his cane as though the truth itself might blow him away. When we reached the school, classes had just ended. Children ran past the car, laughing. Then I saw him, tall with grey flecks in his hair, carrying a leather satchel. There was something in his walk, his quiet posture that felt familiar. George whispered beside me. He looks like my father. We sat there in silence. I watched George's trembling hand on the car door. Go on, I said softly. He deserves to know. But he didn't move. He just sat there, eyes glistening, his breath unsteady. What if he hates me? He whispered. Then at least he'll hate the truth, not the lie, I said. He opened the door and stepped out slowly. I stayed behind, my heart thundering. I watched from the car window as George approached Nathaniel, said something I couldn't hear. Nathaniel looked confused at first, then stunned. They stood there for a long moment, the past and present colliding beneath a grey sky. Then Nathaniel stepped forward and hugged him. I covered my mouth, tears falling silently. George turned, searching for me, his face wet. I smiled faintly through the glass, nodding. It was forgiveness, even if it came 40 years too late. But later that evening, when we returned home, the peace was fleeting. As I unpacked my coat, George sat down by the fire again, holding that old photograph of him and Lillian. He looked up at me and said quietly, "There's one more thing I haven't told you, Eleanor." I froze. What could possibly be left, George? He swallowed, voice trembling. Lillian didn't just vanish that night. Someone made sure she disappeared. I stared at him, the firelight flickering across his face. What are you saying? He closed his eyes. I think I know who took her. The way he said it made my blood turn to ice. Not a guess, not a theory. It was the quiet certainty in his voice that chilled me. George, I whispered. What do you mean you know who took her? He didn't answer right away. His fingers tightened around the arm of his chair, his breathing ragged. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing every crease, every ghost that had lived inside him all these years. She didn't just disappear, he said finally. That's what I told myself all this time. But I knew better. I knew something was wrong. Then why didn't you tell the police? I asked, my voice trembling. I did, he said, his eyes distant. But her father had already painted me as a criminal, said I'd stolen from him, said I'd abused her, that I'd driven her to leave. No one would listen. I was the villain in every version of the story. And maybe I let them believe it. Because if they dug too deep, they'd find what really happened. I sank into the chair opposite him. And what really happened, George? He stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his grey-blue eyes. That night she came to me, frantic, said she had proof of her father's crimes, documents she was going to hand to the authorities. I told her to wait, that we could leave town first. But she said no, that she'd already sent copies to a lawyer in Chicago. I begged her to stop. I thought she was walking straight into danger. He paused, breathing heavily. A few hours later, I heard a car outside. When I ran to the window, I saw 2 men dragging her toward it. She screamed my name once. Then they were gone. My heart pounded. And you didn't chase them? He closed his eyes. I did, but by the time I reached the road, they were gone. The police came later that night, and somehow the story had already changed. Her father claiming she'd left a note, saying she was tired of me. I searched for weeks, but there was nothing. No body, no witnesses, just silence. My throat tightened. You think her father had her killed? He nodded slowly. He was a ruthless man, Eleanor. He wouldn't have let her expose him, and when I vanished soon after, it was the only way to survive. The room fell into heavy silence. The fire crackled softly. Outside, wind rattled the windows like whispered accusations. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man I had loved with the stranger unraveling before me. And now, after all these years, she reappears. Alive? He nodded weakly. She must have escaped that night. Maybe they thought she was dead. Maybe she hid until her father passed. I don't know. But if she's telling the truth, if she really is dying now, it means she's been living in the shadows for decades. My hands trembled in my lap. And Nathaniel? George's voice softened. He said his mother raised him in hiding. She told him his father had died in an accident before he was born. He only learned my real name when she wrote to me. I sat there in disbelief. My life had become a story too strange to belong to anyone real. A man with 2 names, 2 wives, 2 lives, and a trail of secrets buried beneath them all. When the clock struck midnight, George stood, his cane trembling. "There's something I need to do, Eleanor," he said. "Something I should have done long ago." Before I could ask, he went to the study. I followed quietly. He opened the same drawer where the box had been and took out an old revolver wrapped in cloth. My breath caught. "George, what are you doing with that?" He looked at me sadly. "Protection, in case the past isn't finished with us." I stepped forward, panic rising. "George, it's been 40 years. No one is coming for you." He shook his head. "You don't understand. If Lillian was telling the truth, someone helped her disappear. Someone dangerous. And if they know she's alive, or that I found her, they'll want to finish what they started." I reached out, grabbing his arm. "You're sick, George. You can't go digging up the dead." He stared at me for a long time, then slowly lowered the gun. "Maybe you're right, but I can't die with this hanging over me. If her father's people are still out there, Nathaniel could be in danger." His words struck me like lightning. Nathaniel, the son I never knew existed, and now the target of a crime older than he was. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed. His clothes were gone, his cane too. My heart dropped. I searched every room, every closet, but there was no sign of him. On the kitchen table, a note. "Eleanor, don't follow me. There are things I must put to rest. Tell Nathaniel I'm sorry for everything. G." I called the police, but they said there was little they could do. He was an adult, ill or not. Nathaniel drove down that evening when I called him. He was calm, thoughtful, with the same quiet sadness that George had carried all his life. "We'll find him," Nathaniel said, placing a reassuring hand on mine. "He wouldn't have gone far." But he had. 3 days later, they found his car abandoned near the old Hughes estate, a crumbling mansion that had long been sold and left to rot. Inside the glove compartment, they found the revolver. But no George. The police said maybe he wandered into the woods and collapsed. Maybe he wanted it that way. But deep down, I knew better. I drove to the estate myself that evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised colours. The house stood silent, its windows shattered, its gates half rusted. As I stepped through the threshold, the air smelled of dust and ghosts. I called his name. Nothing. Only the echo of my own voice. But as I reached the old study, what used to be her father's office, I saw something on the desk. A letter, yellowed and fragile, weighed down by a silver locket. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting was his. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I've gone where I should have gone long ago. I came here looking for peace, not forgiveness. The truth is, I never stopped loving either of you. You were my light when I didn't deserve one. Tell Nathaniel that his mother was braver than both of us. There's something buried beneath the tree by the riverbank, the one in the photo. It's what started everything. Maybe when you see it, you'll understand why I could never tell you. Goodbye, my love. George." The paper slipped from my hands. The riverbank, the one in that old photograph of him and Lillian, their beginning, and perhaps their end. I looked out toward the horizon where the first stars began to pierce the twilight. Somewhere out there lay the final truth, buried in the earth, waiting for me to find it. And this time, I would. The next morning, I left before sunrise. I didn't tell Nathaniel, though part of me knew I should have. But this wasn't something I could explain to anyone. This wasn't about closure. It was about truth. 40 years of it, buried under lies, waiting beneath a tree by a river. The roads were quiet, wrapped in fog. My old car rattled down the narrow lane that curved toward the riverbank. The same one from the photograph I had found. The one where Lillian had stood smiling, holding a wildflower. I could almost see her there now, young again, her laughter mixing with the hum of summer. By the time I reached it, the mist had begun to lift. The river was calm, its surface a mirror of pale gold. The old willow tree stood exactly where I expected it, its roots thick and tangled, its branches bent low as if bowing to the water. The ground beneath it was uneven, soft from the recent rain. I looked around. No sign of George, no footprints, no car. Just silence. I knelt beside the tree and brushed the damp earth with my hands. The soil gave easily, too easily, as though it had been disturbed recently. My heart pounded. I went back to the car, found the small spade I kept in the trunk, and returned to the spot. Each shovel of earth felt heavier than the last. I kept thinking of his words. It's what started everything. About a foot down, the spade struck something hard. Wood. I froze, breathing shallow. I brushed the dirt away and found an old box, smaller than a suitcase, wrapped in decaying cloth. The lock was rusted. I hesitated only for a moment, then hit it with the spade until it snapped open. Inside, wrapped in yellowed paper, were documents, dozens of them. Some bore the Hughes Banking Company letterhead, others were official government reports. Beneath them, a bundle of old photographs tied with string, and something else, something metallic that caught the light. A locket. The same one that had been on the desk with George's final letter. But this time, it was open. Inside were two tiny portraits. George, younger and smiling, and Lillian beside him. Her face serene, her eyes full of trust. My throat tightened. I sat back against the roots, shivering as I began to go through the papers. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. These were ledgers, records of illegal transactions. Hughes's bank had been laundering funds for government contracts, funneling money offshore through fake charities. George, or Edward as he had been then, had discovered it. There were letters between him and Hughes, even threats. One line in particular made my stomach twist. "If you go to the police, Edward, you'll lose everything you love." And beneath the stack, a faded newspaper clipping. Local woman missing. Lillian Hughes Rains feared dead. Authorities suspect foul play in disappearance of young wife. Husband denies involvement. Father declines to comment. Someone had circled the word foul play in red. The earth beneath me felt colder suddenly. I looked out over the water and thought of George, his trembling hands, the regret in his voice, the exhaustion that lived in his eyes. For all the secrets, all the pain, he had carried this weight alone for decades. Then, from behind me, a voice broke the silence. "I wondered if you'd come." I turned sharply. Nathaniel stood there, his coat buttoned to the collar, his face pale but calm. "You followed me," I said, my voice shaking. "I had to," he said softly. "When you didn't answer my calls, I knew where you'd go. I saw the photo on your desk." He looked down at the box, at the papers strewn across the ground. "So it's true," he whispered. "Everything she told me." I nodded slowly. "Your mother wasn't lying. Your grandfather was the one behind it all. Your father, George, he tried to protect her. He carried this truth until it crushed him." Nathaniel crouched beside me, picking up the locket. His hands trembled as he stared at the faces inside. "He loved her," he murmured. "And he loved me," I said quietly. "It's strange, isn't it, to know a man can live two lives and still mean every word he ever said." We sat there in silence for a while, the river whispering beside us. Then Nathaniel spoke again. "There's something you don't know," he said, "about the night she disappeared." I turned to him, startled. "What do you mean?" "When she got sick," he said, "she told me something she never wanted in writing. She said the night she ran, she didn't go alone. She took the documents you just found, but she wasn't planning to vanish forever. She planned to meet someone, the only man she trusted to help her escape her father's reach." "Who?" I asked. Nathaniel looked at me. "Your husband." I frowned. "But George said she was taken that night." He nodded. "That's what he believed. But she said when he arrived to meet her, someone else got there first. Her father's men. She escaped by hiding in the river reeds. She watched them drag another woman into the car, a maid from the house wearing her coat. They shot her, Eleanor, dumped her body miles away. Everyone thought it was her." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Dear God." "That's why she disappeared completely," Nathaniel said. "She couldn't come back, not without risking his life too." The truth hung between us like fog, thick and unyielding. "She said she forgave him," Nathaniel added softly. "That even after all the lies, all the years, she forgave him. But she wanted you to know something too." "Me?" I asked, stunned. He nodded. "She said you saved him, that if you hadn't come into his life, he'd have never found peace enough to live at all." My eyes filled with tears. The anger, the grief, the confusion, all of it melted into something quieter, something almost tender. I closed the box gently, pressing my hand over it. "Then maybe now we can all rest." We buried the box beneath the willow again, this time together. Nathaniel placed the locket on top before covering it with earth. When it was done, we stood in silence, side by side, watching the river carry the last of the morning mist away. As the wind brushed through the trees, I could almost hear George's voice, soft, apologetic, eternal. "You were my light when I didn't deserve one." I turned to Nathaniel and whispered, "He wanted you to have peace. Don't let the past take that from you." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "And you? What will you do now?" I looked out toward the water. "Go home. For the first time, really go home." The sun broke through the clouds then, scattering gold across the river. And in that moment, I felt it. The release of 40 years of secrets. The lifting of a weight I hadn't even realized I carried. But even as I walked away, one question still lingered quietly in the corners of my mind. If George had come here, if he'd buried this himself, then where had he gone after? The answer wouldn't come until the next dawn. At first light, the knock on my door was soft, hesitant. I had barely slept, still hearing the river in my dreams. When I opened the door, Nathaniel stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide. He held something in his hand, a police badge clipped to a folded note. "They found him," he said quietly. The world seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my chest. "Where?" "Downstream," he said, "by the old bridge. The current must have carried him there." His voice wavered. "He was sitting against a tree when they found him, peaceful, like he was just sleeping." My hand went to my mouth, but no sound came out. For a moment, the room blurred around me, the walls, the floor, even his face, all fading beneath the rush of memories that poured through me. He'd gone back to the river after all, back to where it had begun, where he'd buried his secrets, where he'd lost everything and somehow still tried to build a life from the ashes. Nathaniel stepped forward, pressing the folded note into my hand. "This was in his coat pocket," he said. "It has your name on it." The handwriting was shaky, faintly smudged by the river's dampness. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd first told me his truth, and unfolded it slowly. My dearest Eleanor, by the time you read this, I'll be with her. Maybe not in body, but in peace. I went back to the river to make sure the past stayed buried. I wanted you to know you were never second. You were my first real beginning. Tell Nathaniel I'm proud of him. Tell him I carried his name in my heart even when I didn't know it was his. Tell him I see his mother's strength in his eyes. And tell yourself this: love isn't about who came first or last. It's about who stays when the truth arrives. I'm sorry for every silence, every shadow, every lie. But know this: every morning I woke up beside you was redemption. Yours until the river runs dry, George. The tears came quietly, the kind that don't need sobs. They just fall, one by one, carrying decades of weight with them. Nathaniel sat across from me, his eyes red but calm. He must have known, he whispered. He must have felt it coming. He did, I said softly. He'd been saying goodbye long before he left. We arranged the small funeral together, just the two of us and a few kind souls from town who had known George in fragments. The church was quiet, filled with that strange stillness that hangs in places where truth and grief coexist. There was no grand speech, no choir, just the river outside, humming through the stained glass as though finishing his story for him. After the service, Nathaniel stood beside me at the grave. I used to hate him, he admitted quietly, for what he did to my mother, for leaving us. But now, I think he was just lost. Maybe we all were. I looked at the headstone, simple, unadorned. George Whitlock, Edward Raines, 1938 to 2023. Beneath it, a single line he'd written himself years ago for a family friend. The heart remembers what the mind forgets. I smiled faintly through my tears. He spent his life hiding names, but in the end he signed both. Maybe that's the truest thing he ever did. Nathaniel nodded, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. I'm glad he had you, he said, even after everything. I looked at him and realized how much of George lived in him, the same quiet strength, the same thoughtful pauses before speaking. And I'm glad he had you, I said. You're his proof that something good survived all the lies. We stood there until the sun dipped low, painting the river in gold and rust. The wind stirred the leaves, whispering through the grass. For a moment I thought I heard his laugh again, faint and distant, the way it used to sound when he read the paper out loud just to make me smile. That night, when I returned home, the house felt different, lighter somehow. The ghosts were still there, but they weren't cruel anymore. They were memories now, softened by truth. I sat by the fire, the same chair where he used to rest, and took out the old photograph one last time, Lillian, the river, and him. I studied their faces, then turned it over. The date was fading, but beneath it, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A faint pencil mark, almost erased. 2 initials. E.R. Not George. Edward Raines, the man he had once been. And somehow, seeing it didn't hurt anymore, because for all the names he'd worn, all the lies he'd lived, I knew the man I had loved wasn't a ghost of his past. He was the one who stayed, who learned to laugh again, who grew old beside me even when the truth trembled beneath us. In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel and I spoke often. He brought his wife and children one Sunday, and as they ran across the yard, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Family. Continuity. A new beginning rising quietly from the ruins. Before he left that evening, Nathaniel handed me something. It was the locket, the same one from the riverbank. It's yours now, he said. She would have wanted that. He would have too. When they were gone, I opened it one last time. Their faces looked up at me, George and Lillian, young and unbroken. I smiled through the ache. Then I placed a small photograph of myself beside theirs, folded carefully, so all three of us were together. Later that night, I walked down to the river. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and wildflowers. I stood by the willow tree and whispered, "You're free now, both of you." The wind stirred, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw him standing there across the water, tall, calm, smiling that quiet smile he always wore when he didn't have the words. I smiled back, tears blurring the edges of the world. "Goodbye, my love," I whispered, "and thank you for finally telling me who you were." The current shimmered under the moonlight, carrying the reflection of the stars downriver, where secrets go to rest and hearts find their peace. And for the first time in 40 years, I walked home alone, yet not lonely. The house no longer felt empty, it felt whole, because now every silence in it was honest, every echo clean, every shadow forgiven. I made tea, sat by the window and watched the dawn crawl slowly over the horizon. The light touched the walls, the photographs, the chair he used to sit in, and I realized that love, in its truest form, isn't about possession. It's about endurance. It survives names, time, betrayal. It outlives the river. And in that quiet hour, with the morning sun spilling across the floor, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Rest now, George, rest." Then I smiled, because somewhere I knew he finally had.